Hello, everyone. I'm Janine Corey. I am the head of Cloud Solution Architecture and Global Alliances for Qumulo. And this is a panel discussion that we're having on cloud adoption for the Qumulo product, and a little bit about the future of large-scale unstructured data and how it's impacting different industries, and how using cloud products and AWS cloud products have helped some of the companies in our ecosystem adapt to changing business circumstances. So I'm joined by a really interesting and fabulous panel today, and I'm excited that they've come and joined us. And so what I'd like to do is start out by introducing my panelists, or actually having them introduce themselves. And I just want to let all the people attending know that we carved out about 10 minutes at the end. And if you want to pop any questions that you have into the Q&A chat room, one of my colleagues will pop in and read those and collect them and present them to us at the end. So we'll have a little bit of time for interactive chatting with those of you who are attending today. Thanks so much for coming, and I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I know that I will. So the people on our panel, we have two people who represent sort of the media entertainment industry, animations and special effects, and one person who comes from public sector, smart cities, and government CIO management. So I'm going to have each one of these folks introduce themselves. I'll start with myself, though. I'm Janine Corey. I'm a leader at Qumulo, but I most recently was at AWS, where I was an enterprise transformation leader, and I helped really large-scale customers plan their cloud adoption for an entire variety of applications and workloads across industries. So it tends to be my background to work in this space, and I'm super excited to talk to my panelists here. So let's start with you to my right, JP.
Hi, my name is Jean-Paul Godmer. I am the head of IT for Industrial Brothers. We essentially just do kids animation TV shows that air in Canada and the United States.
Awesome. Graham?
Hi, my name is Graham Petty, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Cinesite Montreal. Cinesite's a visual effects and animation company. We do everything from long form films to episodic, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya Hanna. I'm the Chief Information Officer for King County, Washington, and Director for the Department of IT. King County is the 12th largest county in the US.
Awesome. I'm so glad you're here. So I'm going to kick right off so that we get to talk a little bit about our particular industries and some of the challenges that we've seen both leading up to 2020 and in 2020. So I'm going to go in that same order we went in before. So tell me a little bit about your particular business and industry and why putting your workloads in the cloud made good business sense to you. So, and particularly any of the sort of large scale or fast growing workloads that you manage within your company, or if you had really large cloud-based data like video and image data, why did it make sense to you to move that into the cloud, and what sort of business objectives did you help your company achieve by making that move?
In Industrial Brothers' case, it was about business continuity. So when COVID first hit, we were caught a bit with our pants down, where we didn't have a way of working remotely. And we'd actually been exploring AWS in the past, but we never actually got to a place where we could use workstations or render. So once COVID hit, we hit the ground running. We have Qumulo in-house, and essentially the quickest way that I saw to bring in the studio back up was to utilize Qumulo in the cloud. And it was that part was literally as easy as firing up the instances and starting the replication of data. So in that regards, I was very happy that it was very quick to replicate the data that we had on premises into the cloud fire up workstations, and allow people to start working again. So Qumulo was critical in our success of continuing operations of Industrial Brothers in the cloud.
That's awesome. Did all of your artists or animation people then use sort of VDI to get closer to your file data in the cloud, or did they have workstations that they had that were large enough? I mean, how did that architecture work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. The much more difficult aspect of this was Teradici. So we used Teradici. We were using Teradici on workstations in the cloud initially. The documentation and such around deployment, especially at the time when everyone else was essentially trying to do the same thing, it was difficult. And I see Graham; he's probably understands. So we used we started off with LG thin clients. Now we use 10 zigs thin clients, and so we're all Teradici based. So we use Teradici and Qumulo now. Our cloud deployment has changed a bit, but the technology around it still is essentially the same. So.
And are you able to work like you were before now?
Yeah, we amazingly we were able. Like I must admit, I was skeptical at especially for artists that are using Wacomms and sort of devices that require low latency. But it amazingly just worked. I'd heard Teradici was this is what they did, and this is what their core competency, and it really shows. So as long as you're using devices that's supported by Teradici specifically, everything really, it just works as expected. And we continue to use it now. We've deployed at one point on the cloud, and I mean, it's not a ton of people, but we were over 50 users that were using workstations in the cloud with our Qumulo service, and we're looking to now we're doing proof of concepts around rendering. So we're looking at firing up hundreds of machines in the cloud to do GPU rendering against a Qumulo storage.
Oh, that's great. So you've managed to maintain your productivity after a little lull in order to adapt to your new working circumstances?
Exactly. There was probably 2 weeks where it was people were essentially just twiddling their thumbs waiting for technology to catch up. But now it's 100%. Everyone, like you can see behind me, there's no one here except for some IT people, and everyone is able to work from home. And we've ramped up. Like we're over 100 people right now, and 100 artists plus support staff. And then we would have more if we could find more people. Like we're actually having a hard time hiring for positions that we're looking for, and I think Graham probably has the same problem too in Montreal. But there it seems like right now animation is it's cheaper to do than live action, right? I read some statistics that live action shoots are gone up 30 to 40% just for all the COVID related stuff. So we're we're doing all right. So thankfully, knock on wood.
So you've actually managed to get to where you're able to grow. So it's
yeah,
not even that you were stalled, but by going to the cloud and changing the way you did business, you're actually able to hire and grow and maybe even adapt to some of these changing circumstances of more animation and more content through animation. There are demands in the market.
100%. So we're actually over capacity. Like if everyone had to come back to the office tomorrow, we wouldn't be able to. So cloud is in our foreseeable future at this point.
That's a great story. Graham, how about you?
Yeah, actually, our use case is a little bit different. For us, it's more of a technology decision. We can only have so much local render to do all the jobs we have to do. And if we were ever to plan for the maximum capacity we would ever potentially need, I mean, it would just be exorbitant. So we plan for the average essentially, and we've been bursting out to AWS to get most of our jobs done. Interestingly, Montreal has got a really competitive tax credit, so it drives a lot of gaming and video companies and visual effects. And so there's quite a large pool of high-tech companies here. And so the demand on the local farm is actually pretty extreme. And you can't really count on having those AWS instances every time you need them. So what we found is that if we connect to Virginia, which is US East 1, there's a much larger pool of the kind of blades that we need to get our jobs done. Of course, getting data back and forth from here to there proved to be a challenge. And really that's where we use Qumulo. We replicate all of our pipeline in the Qumulo in the cloud. It allows us to move our data out, render it in Virginia, bring it back, and it's pretty seamless. So for us, it actually allows us to do the work that we've got. We can tackle much more work than we'd otherwise be limited to.
So you're actually using it for scale out and for the access to multiple data centers and a lot more capacity than you would have locally or even in country by partitioning out some of your work and moving it to a whole another data center. And did I see that you are also sort of worldwide?
Cinesite, it's really born out of a company in the UK. They made Montreal was the first birth child of that company, and so it was the second studio. And then they acquired over time Nitrogen in Vancouver, which is now Cinesite Vancouver, which specializes in animation. Image Engine, which is a visual effect company in Vancouver, and Trickster, which has 2 locations in Munich and Berlin. So Montreal is unique in the group in that it does both animation and VFX in the same house. And yeah, I mean, as a group, we're growing all the time. I share your pain, JP, for finding talent. It's pretty crazy right now. I think we've seen a lull in the live action photography due to COVID, and it is nice to have the animation backup for sure, because it's popping right now.
So do your other sites globally also have a similar architecture where they're doing their rendering in the cloud? And do you have occasion where you're sort of distributing, sort of using Qumulo to different different AWS regions around the world to help with that? Or is that a unique kind of scenario that you're working with because of some of the limitations you have locally?
I think really it's a Montreal innovation, if you will. We often share render within the group. If someone's got overcapacity, we are connected. We have a similar pipeline. We can share blades back and forth from site to site. But in an optimal world, we're all busy and no one has idle capacity. And that's really what happened to us at the end of last year. We were so desperate to find compute. We couldn't find it within the group. We couldn't find it locally. And so we had to get a bit more innovative. So I think on that front, we're a little bit different than some of the other sites.
That's a fun story. Tanya, so you come from a little bit of a different and a way more heterogeneous kind of IT environment. Tell me a little bit about what prompted you to start adopting the cloud, and what kind of pressures you face in public sector and in county work.
So honestly, our challenges are similar to Jean-Paul and Graham, right? We're talking about scale, right? Being able to add additional capacity when needed, business resiliency, how we connect with individuals and businesses, particularly in a place like Seattle, Washington, where it's home to Starbucks, Amazon, Microsoft, Alaska Airlines, and you have a very tech-savvy constituency here, whether as individuals and businesses. We had started our cloud journey. Certainly on-prem is very expensive. And just accessibility to be able to work is extremely limited. And so prior to the pandemic, we were already well on our cloud journey. And then the pandemic hits. All of a sudden, we're trying to do virtual courts. We're setting up mobile sites to handle the pandemic response from a public health perspective. And just doing our normal operations. And the thing about government, we generate a ton of data. And so having it be accessible so people can work is particularly critical because, like, for example, I run 911, so I have geospatial files, I've got images, and you still need to conduct business regardless. And so our journey has been, we're not as maybe to the point where Jean-Paul and Graham are, but we're certainly, from a public sector perspective, moving in that particular direction. When we're talking about like a lot of our big data and things like that, we're having to now albeit late, trying to come up with a solution to put in place so that we can access a lot of our huge data files. And we're probably going to be doing something VDI and, to make that happen. We're still trying to architect what our solution is going to be, particularly now since we'll be teleworking through July 2021 and more permanently thereafter. So
we talked a little bit about what your initiating events were and what were some of the reasons why you originally moved to the cloud. Tell me a little bit about what you see coming in 2021 and 2022 as additional pressures that are going to accelerate the way that you use either file data in the cloud or scalability in the cloud, or even ways in which you can see you're driving your business objectives forward in terms of growth or being able to be agile to the changing business dynamics.
So specifically for us, I would say it's going to allow us, we were hamstrung previously by physical space. So people always saw this, we can only hire as many people as we have desks. So that's definitely not the case anymore. And we've seen that. And more to what sort of Graham, I think, uses the cloud for is render. So, and that's what we're really looking for specifically coming up next. So just like Graham was saying, you can't anticipate, like you can always plan for how much render you're going to need, but it never works out as planned. So 100% in the future, like we do have on-prem render GPU, so it's fairly new, and thankfully AWS does also support GPU in the cloud. So and just like Graham as well, it's in the US, in Ohio or in Virginia, versus because we have a direct connect with AWS specifically to help with data, and so that really we're utilizing that a lot for shuttling data around, and now we're bridging over to Virginia to do our testing for render. So I see as much as it makes it somewhat makes sense to try and have as much on-prem, at least I like on-prem hardware, but the ability to do stuff in the cloud and always not be the future is not the future. The AWS is the beauty of it is that you can literally fire up if you need 1,000 frames rendered in 5 minutes, you can render on 1,000 machines. So we're never going to have something like that locally. That's where I see. And it doesn't. You can have one machine for 1,000 hours or 1,000 machines for 1 hour, and it costs the same. So I really see that as sort of being what IB uses the cloud for in the future, and of course workstations as well. If we do have physical machines, and we do use Teradicis on site now as well. We've augmented our AWS resources with on-prem resources, but it's not going to go away. So if anything, it's just going to grow, especially as IB is growing, because there's more animation being required. We're going to increase our on-prem render, but as well, we're definitely going to be using, once our POC is complete with AWS, I can totally see us bursting out to the cloud as well. So I see a lot more of that coming up in 2021.
Do you regularly meet with your company leadership team to talk about new business objectives or new growth opportunities that you see that you're now able to tackle you might not have been able to tackle before? I wouldn't say it comes up on a weekly basis, but it definitely is part of the conversation now. So like we're talking about new business, and instead of just being like, can we order enough hardware to start, it becomes part of the conversations versus how quickly can we ramp up in the cloud versus how quickly we can do on site. And with COVID now, like there's logistics issues with delivery of hardware. Like hardware's been delayed, like our render farm was delayed. So we were looking towards AWS to help us out initially as well as we waited for our render farm. So 100%, like it's, I forget where I was actually finishing my sentence on that, but yes. Yeah, so one of the things that I found when I was doing a lot of enterprise transformation work was getting all of the leadership team within a company to start thinking about what their business vision is once they're really enabled to free themselves up from the number of desks you have, the number of seats you have, or the amount of compute you have, can often change the way that you think about your overall company objectives, what you're capable of doing in 2021 and 2022, what your growth patterns can look like. I know the same thing probably exists very much in the smart city space too. So the way you think about what you're capable of doing, what you can automate, what you don't really need people to do, you can use people in better ways. I'm wondering how much you are starting to have those conversations with your leadership team now that the pressure to order everything and limit yourself based on what your capacity is has sort of gone away for you, or is in the process of being eliminated from how you constrain your decisions and your scope of work.
Before I imagine this was actually not just us either, that especially senior leadership, I find they want people, it's like butts in seats, essentially. Like it's people aren't being productive unless they're sitting at their desk. And I think that now you can kind of see that that's not always the case. Like we're finishing projects and everyone's working from home. We're all being adults. So I think that that was a hurdle. I think that once they got over it, they realized that where the value is now, that there is value in allowing people to work from home. We can shift, people all still attend meetings. We can all still be at, efficiency isn't 100%, but it's better than zero. So like everyone has to adapt a little bit, but ultimately I think that it is much more part of the conversation now than it has been even 8 months ago. So that part is I find interesting, because I've been pushing this for a while, and it's not even just at this company, at previous companies, and it seems like it did take a pandemic to sort of force the issue, but it's in a good way. It's shown that we can do things that are not always the way that we've always done it.
Obstacles that are disguised or actually opportunities, right? So some people see an obstacle, other people see an opportunity to do things differently and prove that they can be done. Graham, what about you? What do you see as opportunities that were cloaked in this particular sense of challenges?
Well, I think it's actually eliminated a lot of discussions, because we had a show last year that it was a 911. A vendor couldn't deliver. So the producer's running around trying to find a place to house this work. We had no planning time. And I think under different circumstances, we might have had to reject that work because we wouldn't have had the capacity. But being able to expand our render footprint sort of instantly allowed us to sort of take on that work. And it wasn't really a point of discussion. And I think sort of more generally, no one likes to cut big fat checks for technology. It's, it typically hits the bottom line. It's a capital expense. Accountants don't like it. This allows us to kind of tie the work and the expense together in a very logical way. It makes it a very easy sell in a lot of ways. Hey, we've got this big project in. Here's the operational expense associated with delivering that to the client. It's very, very easy for even non-techie people to understand. So for us, it's been very, very helpful on the budgeting side.
So it sounds like you got to have some real conversations about changing the way that you budget projects by moving to having operational costs that you get to attach to projects and be able to say, here's our profit, here's our overall scope, and here's how much we can pay. And being able to shut it down when the project is over means that it completely changes the nature of the way that you're growing and expanding to handle business, and even the way your finance team is looking at how they account for it.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's exactly the case. And another thing we found is just once you've got Qumulo in the house, it spreads very quickly. I mean, I don't want to make any virus analogies. It's got such a negative connotation, but we started with hardware, and we had such success that when it came time to looking at cloud options, it was sort of the first, company we looked at. And I have to say that your sales and technical support people are the best, like top of class, in my opinion, across the industry. And it makes it very appealing so I know when I have a problem and I pick up the phone that someone's going to be there. And if I'm up late, they're up late with me. And, I had a pretty big IT crisis event at a previous company, and they were the first people to show up and the last to leave. And that's carried through at Cinesight. So For us, we've started with the render, and we're already doing a case analysis for archiving. We've been archiving like the Stone Age. We're putting it on magnetic tape and housing it in a warehouse, and it's like the Stone Age. So bit by bit, I think our application, our use of Qumulo is going to expand over time.
Awesome. That's a really nice story to hear. And thanks for those call outs to our support and our tech and our salespeople. You're right. They work hard and they're so committed to customers. That customer obsession thing is something that I think AWS and Qumulo and all of us share in common. What about you, Tanya? What do you see as being opened up for you in terms of the dynamics in 2021 and 2022 by your cloud usage and just some of the cool opportunities that are opened up to you?
Well, certainly the pandemic has been the chief innovation officer in public sector. As I look to the future and where public policy and where we're going, things that we're doing, particularly in transportation, whether it's pilots for autonomous vehicles and just taking in loads of data off of like buses and things for surveillance, that is going to continue to grow, particularly in our law enforcement, as you really start to think about like body cams, dash cams, and things of that nature. We're going to see exponential growth. We're starting to figure out how do we think about smart charging grids set up as you move to like electric buses because of climate action. Those are things that are going to definitely occur on a fast track over the next several years. Other things that we're beginning to do behind the scene is really doing AI and machine learning, particularly around recognition and things of that nature. When you think about just particular law enforcement and things of that nature where privacy laws allow it, you're going to see that grow in public sector. And as the amount of data comes in, our ability to be able to process, right? Because you can't just go around previously like with CD-ROMs and things like that. You laugh, it's still out there, but those medias are becoming less frequently to acquire. And so for us, it's really going to be about how do we leverage cloud and products like Qumulo to help us be able to really pivot in the direction we're going to need to go. And I'm expecting that as a result of COVID, we're starting to see the momentum really pick up and more, fast tracking of things where it would take like years. It's certainly been months where we're coming up with solutions and how to pivot.
I read an article recently that talked about how innovation and innovative ideas are really accelerated when you take teams and you push them to get to outcomes sooner than they feel like they're ready. And with the pandemic, you talked about the pandemic being the chief innovation officer for everyone. Getting pushed to do things that you have to do before you're ready causes teams to come up with, you have no choice. You're gonna innovate. You're gonna figure out a way to get to the other side of it. And it just really breaks through a lot of the log jams of standard thinking, right? Because everybody knows they're not going to work and you don't have the luxury of the time to do all of the planning to make sure everything is right. And so I think you're very much right that we're a little bit on the cusp of opportunity to make some changes and to have things make sense to our leadership teams that for so long there was some standard thinking, like butts and seats, have to be in the office or the work isn't getting done, or you have to actually control your data on premise and where you can see it, or else somehow you're not protecting your data, or your data might leak away, or you might have not have total visibility to it. But what we're seeing is that you can move that all to the cloud. You can have the exact same kind of visibility with enterprise level tools that are cloud enabled. And in fact, you can rethink the way that growth in your business happens and how you can innovate can happen, because we're having to make changes faster than what careful planning. And when you have careful planning, you have a lot of standard thinking, right? SOPs that go into that. And when you have to do things before you're ready, you have to kind of throw that out and figure out new ways to do it. And sometimes you can get some leadership vision, consensus, and alignment on what really are the top priorities when you're in a circumstance that feels like a little bit of an emergency circumstance. And I know that, the city, everybody having to work remotely and continuing to have to run things and then add things quickly, like probably drive-through testing clinics, which I went to myself, right? And mobile clinics for the public that are being offered free across cities. And still we had, enormous amounts of sort of protests and street protests and public safety and public health initiatives that really had to ramp up at the same time. A lot of other things were happening and people were working remotely. So I have to say that, I admire you all a lot for the pivots that you made this year. That whole idea of interesting times lead us to interesting solutions and can allow us to break through in conversations and in ways that we weren't able to do maybe even as much as 12 months ago, to do things differently and to see that you can in fact not just be 100% productive, but can actually grow and change in ways that didn't seem as possible to do as fast. So I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you each to give me a little bit of a tip that you've learned in this process for anybody on our audience who is stymied, challenged, it has run into some roadblocks, really wants to think about how they could be operating in the cloud, but still hasn't gotten there yet. And we do have a lot of those kinds of customers out there, which is where you were probably before you hit a real pressure point that you were able to break through to get stuff done. So what's your top tip for them? And then we'll let everybody out there ask us some questions, and Adam's going to field them to us. So JP?
That's a good question. I would say it's not don't be afraid of it. It's not as difficult as you sort of think it would be. They do make it like AWS and Qumulo both. They have great support. And even Teradici is better now that it's not the beginning of the pandemic. Embrace, I would say, utilize all the resources you can. Look at, and a lot of people are posting online. So of the problems that they're overcoming as well. And yeah, don't be afraid. That's what I would say, that just jump in and just give it a shot. And obviously reach out to your community. So I would say.
Yeah, I'd echo that like 100%. I think too, it pays to be a bit proactive as well. I mean, if you can get a handle on some of these things and ask these questions when the pressure is off, it'll make your life a lot easier. If the pandemic hits and you're scrambling, you're also scrambling with everybody else at the same time. So it's to your advantage to be a little bit ahead of the game, and there's no real cost of kicking the tires and testing it out and seeing if it works, because you may find that it's easy, and when you need it, then you're all set up.
My tips would be, one, we're never going back to pre-COVID times. So, you have to position your business, and, public sector is the same, to be able to move quickly. And I think the pandemic has shown that organizations that could move quickly were better able to adapt. And if you're stuck to on-prem, it's probably going to be much more difficult for you to navigate as the priorities of the business change, as your needs for technology change. So that the other thing that I think is also key is having strategic partners that can help you be in a position to innovate and helping you come up with like solutions that work for your business. And if you find the right partners, they can help you execute quickly. And Graham is a testament to that.
Yeah.
And I know within AWS, we've got some great industry BDs that have reference architectures that it really, can quickly get you stood up, solving all kinds of different problems. I know when I was at AWS and I was a tech BD, that was certainly part of what I did. And I've seen them in genomics and life sciences and media and entertainment. And every problem we run into, we're almost never the first ones to solve that problem. Somebody else has struggled with before, and AWS has a wealth of that knowledge. As they say, there's no compression algorithm for experience. There is, millions of customers that operate in AWS from across industries, and that experience and those stories exist in there. And so you're absolutely right. Tap into that level of support and get that to help you stand it up. And the earlier you think about that agility and what could happen and how you could be prepared for it, I think really helps us. So one of the reasons I've always been a big advocate of cloud solutions is exactly for that reason, right? That it allows us to adapt quickly, to scale up quickly. I read another just quick blog about how I think it's Blackboard, which is one of the educational tools, right? Online teaching tools, has seen 50x growth this year, which again, you can imagine every teacher on the planet is having to teach remotely, not to mention the growth you've seen in Zoom. And they were able to handle that and manage that. And if you look at that kind of agility, the fact that they were sort of cloud-based going in, Zoom as well, means that, they can expand at that rate and handle that kind of volume. But that's not something that if you didn't think in an agile future way, you would necessarily have been able to do. So, kudos to you for fast pivots and for thinking ahead and for keeping that sort of lean, agile thinking going that has allowed your companies to sort of grow and adapt and continue to take projects on, and even adapt to the fact that it is probably harder to do live movie shoots because people can't get together in the same kind of numbers they could before. So the needs for animation studios to create content is probably bigger than ever. So that ability that you guys have provided for your company have probably allowed for an amount of adaptation and growth and profitability for everybody who works there and for your company as a whole that may not have been available otherwise. Adam, I'm going to pop over to you and see if there's questions that we can start answering from the panel that come from our attendees.
Yeah, so the first two questions that we have are for you, JP, specifically.
Thank you.
And the first question is, what deployment model are you using when you're spinning up new boxes?
Initially, we use AMI. So we have we created an AMI specifically that has our image on it. And then, so as we spin up new boxes, we're still working on ways of automating that actually. But we do have an image that does sit in the cloud. So when we need new workstations, we just spin up a new box based on that AMI. We're Windows based too. So that's another reason we've really embraced Qumulo in the cloud, is because unfortunately right now, our workstations and our render is both Windows based. So there's not a lot of cloud resources to use other than Qumulo for fast storage on site, or sorry, in the cloud.
Awesome, thanks. And Graham, is that similar to what you guys are doing as well?
Yeah, we're using HP Desktop Remote primarily as our connectivity, and we're right in the same data center as AWS, so it's actually quite easy for us to connect. No bandwidth issues for us.
Awesome. The next question was for you, JP, as well. And the question was around latency, and if your end users were experiencing any latency when you moved to the cloud or AWS for the first time.
It wasn't perfect. but it seems to, we did have an initial issue with our direct connect, and latency was a little bit higher, and that's since been dropped to about 7 milliseconds. And we do utilize our direct connect specifically for our PC over IP users as well. So no one's complained. In the very beginning, there was a couple people that were, because it's certainly not like, it's not perfect, but it's really close. So I would say that there's been no complaints. What really surprised me, and I'll be perfectly honest, is the audio, like animators. So audio and video being able to sync in real time over Teradici, to me, is quite impressive. So if there is a bit of latency, like for drawing, if people are using Cintiqs or Wacom's, there's they're definitely going to notice more than anybody else. But again, it's totally usable. It allows them to work.
Awesome, thanks. And then we had another question as well for the M&E folks. Are your guys' organizations primarily SMB or NFS?
For me, it's currently it's SMB for the most part. We do have Linux, anything that's Linux based for, like, say, our Nuke farm or otherwise, it uses NFS. But for the most part, our GPU render farm is all Windows, so it's all using CIFS/SMB for me.
Yeah, we're primarily Linux based. We use Windows for Adobe applications.
Were you guys considering any batch related processes for rendering process when using spot instances?
We do, yeah. We use batch renders for asset bundles and all kinds of things. Makes it a little bit easier to get the data in and out, especially if we're going to Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And for us with the rendering, we're still working out the details of that, to be honest. So and we use Qumulo replication, so we don't, like, right now the data between here and Virginia is replicated in real time. So we're not using batch yet, but it may be in the future.
Awesome, thanks for sharing, guys. And we have one last question, which is, I'm going to direct this towards you, Janine. How is cloud transforming the future of fintech? It's a very broad question. But if there's any comments you had, that'd be much appreciated.
I would say that fintechs in general have seen a lot of disruption in their industry. So a lot of all cloud and cloud native fintech companies have come on the market. And what that means is that more established fintechs that thought they could have 2-year plans and 4-year plans for how they go to market with new offerings for direct to customer insights, maybe of their stock portfolio or of their investment portfolios. Those used to be things that brokers paid for and subscribed to, and they could kind of keep on-prem. But now a lot of fintechs and finservs in general are seeing that the consumers themselves want a lot more. They don't want to pay for it. They want it to be free. They want it to be readily available, which means that they have to move to the cloud and sort of constantly be creating large-scale calculations and pushing those dashboards out in a really pretty freely available way. And they're also the disruptive smaller companies are coming in and doing no fees for that kind of information. So customers are not wanting to pay for it. Brokers aren't wanting to pay for it anymore either, right? Because you could just get on Robinhood or Webull or anything and get that stuff for free. So it's been very disruptive to the fintech and the finserv industries. And so what I'm seeing is that they are in a very large scale moving out of data centers, trying to lessen the amounts that they're paying and compete by giving a lot more ready information to anybody who wants it for free, and looking at ways to have much lower fees on how do they do that. And that is driving a lot of movement to the cloud, a lot of movement to managing data analytics, running them constantly and making them available to consumers through mobile and device apps, which was, again, not part of what a lot of the large brokerage houses were doing even 5 years ago. So what we're seeing is that they are looking very much at how do we create new products that are direct to consumers, that are low fee, that are low cost, and they have to do it or they're going to be losing market share, and they're already kind of losing market share at a pretty consistent rate from what I could see from the smaller companies that are popping up. So it's been great in terms of seeing them turn into much more agile, much more innovative cultures inside the larger fintech and FinServ companies.
The last question is for JP. Do you have any plans to use any container-based tools like Kubernetes or any other cloud-based rendering applications?
It definitely interests me. So, I mean, given that we have multiple productions that each have different requirements, I would love to have containers for rendering that essentially are based on productions. And that way, if one night it's production A and one night it's production B, it just loads the appropriate container. We're not there yet, but it's definitely on my radar. We're actively looking at that.
Thanks, guys. That is all the questions we have. We appreciate your participation tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining me. It was such a great conversation, and I so enjoyed learning a little bit more about you guys' current cloud load and your future plans, and I hope we get to keep catching up. Thanks for the great questions, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.